Hey everybody, it's Tommy DeMisa. Welcome to my attic. I like to say that these days because I've been up in the attic during quarantine right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm not laughing about the pandemic. I'm laughing that I've been up in the attic for about 63 days now. This is another episode of what I affectionately call Philanthropy in Focus. And today I have the great opportunity to shed some light on an organization that I've been aware of for a number of years. And really just kind of help tell the story of Neighborhood Housing Services of Jamaica, located right there in Jamaica, Queens. And I have the executive director, Lori Miller, here with me today on the show. Hi, Lori. How are you?
I'm fine.
Good. Glad you're here. And Lori is going to really tell us the story. She's been involved with the organization for a number of years and is going to share with us the mission of the organization, the program of the organization. And it's always my intention on these shows that I do whatever I can to help get the word out for organizations and really help amplify their message. So the other thing at some point in our conversation today too, we'll talk about collaboration. So about NHS and how they may collaborate with other organizations, how they may be looking to continue or enhance collaboration with other organizations. So I'm going to kick it over to Lori right now. So Lori, you told me we prepped a little before the call now, but you've been with Neighborhood Housing Services for a number of years. So can you kind of tell me a little bit about how you even found out about the organization?
Yes, I was working, in the for-profit world, and I happened to be working in the evening, and wanted to give back to the community. So I wanted to volunteer, and had no idea that organizations like Neighborhood Housing Services of Jamaica existed. But I also spent a lot of time, collecting articles and reading about buying a home. Wasn't particularly interested at the time, but just collecting information. And I sort of tripped up on NHS of Jamaica when I actually started looking for an apartment. It turns out that the realtor was the board president. And I was talking about how I was interested in giving back to the community, and he shared that he worked with an organization and they were looking for someone, a position that they titled development coordinator. And it was actually somebody who would drive around southeastern Queens, find vacant properties, do the research to track down the owners, then bring that information back to the organization. And our goal then was to purchase those properties, rehab them, and sell them at below market. And it was just a series of events that allowed me to get there. And when I actually had my interview with the executive director, I remember leaving and saying, I don't care if this company hires me, I'll work with them anyway. I'll volunteer. And that was the start.
Why was it? What was the draw there? Because I mean, you were looking for an opportunity to give back. What was it about the housing piece, specifically in Southeast Queens in the Jamaica area, and this goes back, not to date ourselves, but I think you said 1989 was when you started a relationship with the organization. So what drew you specifically to say something around housing was where you wanted to be?
Well, because I grew up in southeastern Queens, and I remember, becoming aware of the fact, through, articles and just, having, gone to school, out of state, that it was not always a typical thing for a community of color to have such a high rate of home ownership. And so, I knew many people and, who bought homes. I'd heard some stories about people who'd had difficulties because they didn't know what the process was. They put all their faith in, in people who unfortunately were all connected. So the realtor may have been connected to the attorney, to the mortgage broker and all those. So people sometimes found themselves, in trouble. And that's why I said, wow, it would be wonderful if there was a way for people to get this information. Like I said, not knowing that NHS of Jamaica existed.
So you were looking for NHS of Jamaica, but you didn't know there was such a thing. It sounds like you were kind of saying, where's the advocacy group for these individuals in these communities that, as you say, are underserved or were underserved, probably still in a lot of ways are underserved, I'm sure. And you end up finding something that actually existed. So it was kind of one of these serendipitous things. It sounds like you were looking and you didn't even know it was going to be there. So did they make you an offer or did you become a volunteer?
No, they did. I came in and I interviewed with the executive director, with the board committee. There was a separate development corporation, so some of the board members sat on that committee, and I met with them. And I remember at the time, NHS of Jamaica was part of a citywide organization, NHS of New York City. And I remember the executive director calling me while I was at work that evening and saying, I'd like to make you an offer, but I have to, find out, how much I can pay you. And I said, oh, it doesn't matter. And then when I hung up the phone, I couldn't believe I said it doesn't. And so, but as I said, when I left the interview with her at first, it's one of those things that it just immediately, something clicks. And I knew, based on what she told me about what the organization did and what they had done, and their mission, that this was something that I'd like to do.
That's it's not all the time in our lives that we get that opportunity to have something that just clicks and it makes a lot of sense. But when we find it, and I talk a lot about on this show and on other conversations I'm having around people finding their passion. A lot of people go to a job or a career every day that maybe it's not their passion, but they do it because they got to pay the mortgage, or they got to pay the rent, or they got to put the kids through school. But I always love the stories and I think you find it a lot more in the nonprofit sector, because people tend to go to the nonprofit sector for a role, a job, a career because they're passionate about service. They're not necessarily going to nonprofit because they're going to make more money, and that oftentimes they make less money. So, when it comes to comparing it to the other side of things, I'm so interested because we had a conversation about 2 weeks ago, and I'm so interested to talk about the programming that NHS did offer even back then when you got started, and how some of that has either changed or stayed consistent. So can we talk a little bit about, the array of programs that NHS is really offering?
Yes. Well, I kind of go back to the beginning. NHS, got its start in 1974. And it came about because, people in the community realized that, redlining was something that was prevalent at the time. And so the homeowners were not able, some of them had difficulty getting insurance. Others had trouble getting home improvement loans. So if they needed to make repairs to their homes, despite the fact that they had banking relationships, at the major banks, they couldn't get money to fix their homes. And sometimes just very minor repairs, but small things like a leak over a number of years can wreak havoc, in a home. And so community leaders, elected officials, banks, you think back to some of the banks that used to exist, like Chemical Bank, those individuals got together with government and created a pool of funds, created NHS of Jamaica. And we were one of the first nine NHSs across the country, the first one in New York City. And we created a loan pool. And that loan pool was to provide home improvement loans to homeowners who could not otherwise borrow money. And we customized the loans to the individual's ability to pay. So, I remember there was one of our clients, back in the late 80s, who was in her 80s, had, very small retirement income, and her house had been damaged by a fire next door. Apparently, so much water had spilled over onto her house that when we went inside, I never knew what was behind plaster walls. Well, we got to see, because all of the plaster came off her walls. She couldn't afford to pay anything, and so we gave her a loan at 0% interest, and her loan didn't have to be repaid until after she passed and the house was either refinanced or sold.
Wow. Is that was that like a typical way to structure a loan, or was that like was it a one-off, or is that a unique situation?
That was a unique situation. As I said, the loans were tailored to the individual's ability to pay. So you, for instance, might want to borrow $7,000, and based on, we do a full, we do a budget with, we check the credit. We ensure that the homeowner or the individual trying to borrow is indeed the owner of record and has, and is authorized to take out a loan. And so you might be able to pay your loan back in 5 years, at a 6% interest rate. I, on the other hand, may be able to pay mine back in 2 years, at a lower interest rate. So we really base it on the individual's ability to pay. And as I said, in that particular client's case, we knew she didn't have the resources to pay, but she was very much, in need.
Absolutely. So, all right. So in that scenario, this pool of funds, NHS of Jamaica actually acts as the lender with these home improvement type loans in the past and still to this day, or has that changed?
No, well, in the past, yes, we were the lender. We were the lender. In 1983, the organization now is called NeighborWorks America, but at the time, it was Neighborhood Reinvestment Corporation, and sort of quasi governmental agency. And they came to New York City, realized that there was need in throughout the boroughs, and they asked NHS of Jamaica if we would be interested, in becoming part of, the NHS of New York City. And so we did. And over the years, NHSs were created in Bedford-Stuyvesant, East Flatbush, Staten Island, 2 in the Bronx, the North Bronx and the South Bronx, and then 1 in Northern Queens. And so we were, being a citywide organization, we were able to take advantage of centralization of certain, resources like fundraising, accounting services, and things like that. So we were able to grow the organization to a point where we went from just being able to provide loans from our relatively small loan fund, to a wealth of services. We often refer to it as sort of, full cycle home ownership services, full cycle lending. Because we now have graduated to pre-purchase, pre-purchase or first-time home buyers is the focus, even though, we'll work with anyone. But the focus for us really is first-time home buyers for people who are in that, 80 to, 100, 120%, of median income for New York City. Those are the folks that a lot of the banks, would like to target, all possible to get those folks into homeownership. It's a challenge in New York City. One of the things that we didn't think we would probably ever see was a time when folks couldn't afford to buy a home in our community, but that's just the reality.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we see a lot of that. So when you think of these first-time home buyers, and I remember, now it's many years ago, but when my wife and I first purchased the co-op in Queens, actually in Glen Oaks Village, young people don't, not just young people, but people who haven't made such an investment, such a purchase, they don't know how to do it. They don't understand the process. And to your point, unfortunately, sometimes the business folks on the other side, are not as helpful. I'm being nice, I guess, when I say that, but
there are a lot of good ones out there too.
What? Say that again.
I said there are a lot of good ones out there too. Those are
100%, 100%. I have family in the mortgage business, and they run good operation, but having an advocate like an association like yours and what you do, I think is critical, because your interest is to make sure that these people are educated and get the best level of service and opportunity that's out there for them, without any sort of agenda other than being of service. So I'd love to understand more what it looks like. That you said, I wrote down first-time home buyers, but you said pre-something. So give me that term again.
Well, we call it pre-purchase. It's
pre-purchase. So what does that program look like? Like how does that work?
So what first thing is we run these workshops, pre-purchase workshops or first-time home buyers workshops, and we just invite folks to come in, and we go through all of the steps, getting yourself ready, your credit, know what your income is, what all sources of income are. We bring in professionals from the industry, so we like to have a banker. There, one of the mortgage lenders, banks and mortgage lender come in and talk about the process. They talk about what they look for, the things that strengthen your application. We bring in inspectors. We stress the fact that it's, even though everything looks good on the surface, it's really important to have an inspector, have someone go through that house and tell you what may need to be addressed. And attorneys. Everyone's got to have an attorney. So, we just lay out what the process is. So that's just a general workshop. And then if folks are interested, we ask them to make an appointment to start the one-on-one counseling process. And that's when they sit down with a counselor and go through, an in-depth, review of their expenses, their income, et cetera. And at the end of that, we're able to tell them, based on everything, that we reviewed and everything you presented, we can tell you how much of a mortgage you typically would qualify for. And so for many people, that's a wake-up call, because, you often have folks, who want to buy a home, but their income, in this market would only support, a co-op.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, Queens being geographically part of Long Island, I think we all know how challenging it can be to purchase here. I'm out in Long Island right now, but we do a lot of work in Queens as well. It's expensive to get started out here for people, whether it be the boroughs or on the island. And I think, that consulting that your team does up front to really kind of might be tough love at some point, because people think, well, I want this thing over here. Well, the numbers don't really provide that you can qualify for that. I will tell you, I mean, you mentioned a co-op. I started out with a co-op. The biggest challenge with the co-op was when we left there was 5 of us living there, and none of them paid rent. The other ones, except because they were my children, but they weren't there when we got there. But by the time we got out to a house out in Long Island, we had 3 kids, now 4. So I'd love to understand, like, how do people, because I think the biggest challenge, and I think we said it this way, you and me, a couple of weeks ago, that unfortunately, NHS of Jamaica and probably the other organizations around the city um, are a best kept secret. But you don't want to be that type of secret. You have this great value. So when we were talking, I said, aside from having asking you to come on the show, I said, how do you get the word out? Like, how can you may know this about me, that I have a lot of connections. I got a big mouth. I talk to a lot of people. So when you have those types of events coming up, and I looked on the website earlier today, and obviously everything now is virtual world that we live. So I saw something coming up. Did you have something yesterday? I think I saw
Yesterday,
yesterday.
the first time home buyers
All
workshops.
right. So first, I guess, how often are those first time home buyers events? And then how do people find out, and how can people listening help you get the word out, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Well, we have now, we do those very frequently. Those, and we don't, and to be honest with you, we don't have to advertise those, because typically what happens is every workshop fills up, and so folks just get rolled over to this. So when is the next one? When is the next one? And they get rolled over to that. But we use constant contact to
Okay.
do email blasts. We've got almost 8,000 names on our list. We work with all of our local elected officials when we're presenting, putting on any type of event. We ask them to publicize it. They all do typically weekly newsletters. They get the word out. They are great advocates and supporters of NHS Jamaica. And so, we get a lot of referrals from them. Constituents come to them with all types of issues. As I said, we're talking about first-time home ownership, but we do, home improvement lending. We do foreclosure intervention and prevention. So a number of things. So people come to them with an issue and it's housing related. They're going to refer them back to us, and they do that. And so if it's something that we can handle, we do. If not, we also do a lot of referrals. We often find that in working with folks, it's not always as straightforward as, I'm here and I want to buy a house, or I'm having a problem with my apartment. We almost often get involved in what is probably more like case management, because you find out that there are other issues, and then we've got to make referrals, sometimes to social service agencies, et cetera. So it really becomes kind of a holistic approach.
Yeah, without a doubt. And now I have like 15 follow-up questions to that. So I got to figure out how I want to go about asking that. I'll start with this from the catchment area of what your focus is. Yes, you're located in Jamaica, but how far do your wings stretch, and because I'm trying to think of, and I asked this question for myself because who can I bring to you and introduce to you that might be able to, again, have maybe some sort of reciprocal relationship, and I mean other nonprofit organizations, um, but also from a support perspective, I'm sure you'd like to have the commercial side. You like to have the banks and folks, aside from them coming in to be thought leaders and explain how the process works. I'm sure they can help with funding if that's appropriate. You'll have to
Yes.
talk to me about that. So catchment area, I guess, is where we can start.
So our catchment area, we're funded, by New York City, a number of different city agencies, and also New York State. And so our catchment area is, it's in Southeast Queens, is primarily Community Board 12. And so, I mean, it's like, everything in New York City is large. So, hundreds of thousands of folks.
Mhm.
And we say, but what we typically say is surrounding communities, because, we don't turn anyone away. With respect to our home improvement lending, grant and loan program, we are mandated to service people in the Bronx and certain neighbors, certain parts of Brooklyn. We don't do Staten Island, we don't do Manhattan, but we have folks, who come from all over the city, to participate in any of our, workshops and counseling. And as I said, we don't turn anyone over. But the focus really is Southeastern Queens, South Jamaica, certain, parts of South Jamaica. But, when you talk Southeastern Queens, it's not always all of the neighborhoods, I would say, that people think of as having great need, because some of the communities that are closer to the Nassau County border, Rosedale,
Mhm.
Cambridge Heights,
Cambria
and all,
Heights, yeah, St.
yeah,
Albans, yeah.
Village and places like that. But, it's a very diverse community. It's more, I mean, I grew up in Southeastern Queens. I grew up in, was born in Jamaica, grew up in St. Albans and lived in Rosedale and
Mhm.
places. And, have seen, the change in the community, over the years, when we were first there, as the community started to change, it was primarily, African-American, people, of whose parents, if not born here, had immigrated, from the South and places. But now, if you take a look at Southeastern Queens, I mean, it's a very, it is still a community of color, but, very large Caribbean
Right,
population.
West Indian, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. And
yeah.
I think you probably, hear there's always reference made to the fact that Queens itself as a borough, is the most diverse, in the city. And we're starting to see that, in the Southeastern Queens community as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is incredibly diverse. And, I made an introduction for you to my friends over at the Queens Chamber of Commerce. And, Tom Gretsch is always, the CEO of the chamber, is always talking about, and with pride, kind of thumping his chest with pride about the diversity that we have in Queens. And I think it, it's got to be the most diverse county, I'd say, in the country. I'm going to screw this up when I say the number of languages, but I know he says that when Tom talks about it, it's like 150 different languages are spoken in Queens.
Us.
It's crazy, right? It's just so wild. And again, what's fun about Queens? So I've gone up to last couple of years. Queens Day has been up in Albany, and we actually about 2 weeks ago it was a virtual Queens Day done here on Zoom. Like in May of 2020, everything is done here on Zoom or some other virtual platform. But what's kind of fun when you go up to Queens Day in Albany is you have all the electeds up there, and you go to both sides, and the electeds talk about their areas of where they cover, and what their favorite restaurants are, and the food. And because you know as well as I do, somebody has hung out in Queens as long as you have, you just know, like, you walk down the street and you're like in another country.
Yeah, yeah,
It's,
absolutely.
yeah, it's so cool. I mean, we love Queens. And so the the home improvement side of things, the foreclosure side of things, I look, as we all know, as we're here, May 14th of 2020, we know how challenging a lot of people are out of work, Lori. A lot of people have been furloughed, and I mean, I hear varying reports of what people expect. Like, some businesses think, some people say some of these businesses aren't coming back,
Yeah.
and it's obviously it's sad, and it's tragic for the businesses. But let's talk about those people now. A lot of those people are going to have trouble finding new work, and so I think you're going to see, and maybe you're seeing it already, or maybe you're getting the phone calls, like, I need a modification, or what do I do? Like, maybe I don't even know what the word modification is, but like, I need help. So if we could talk about that, because I think that's super timely, super topical for people to be aware of.
Well, the interesting thing is, because I keep, checking in with, the foreclosure services team, and we're not getting as many calls as we should. I mean, I thought we would be, overwhelmed. Unfortunately, I think a lot of information, people are hearing about, forbearance and this and that. And so, my concern is just as you said, there are people, who are not working now, who may not go back to work or may have, reduced income if and when they do go back to work. And that's going to be a concern. And, what we do with, the pre-purchase, the first-time home buyers, it's about preparing them for that. And so actually the team is working on, a forbearance workshop that I believe we're going to put on next week. And that's so that people, understand, they hear about certain types of forbearance, but they don't realize that it depends on what type of mortgage you have. If you have a government, insured or backed mortgage, there's a certain type, but, if your loan happens to be with a non-traditional, a non-bank lender, it may be different, and that's something in the community that we serve. There are, I'd say a disproportionate number of the mortgages, are with non-bank lenders. And so folks need to know they can't assume that they know what it is. So we're trying to, as I said, we're doing this workshop. We're going to rely on, our elected officials and other, community partners, just as an example, we've done some workshops with the Community Healthcare Network, which has an office around the corner from us in Jamaica, because it's just about getting to the people who might need these services, and again, folks don't even know that we exist. They, as you said, they don't know the questions to ask. They don't know what their options are, and be prepared. We've talked internally about how, some folks may think that they've, hit the lotto if, their take home now with unemployment and, the added $600 in many cases exceeds what some people, were bringing home before. So this is not the time to go out and just, be a spendthrift. You need to think ahead and say, what if my job doesn't come back? Or what if I cut back to part-time? Only spend what you need to spend and put the other aside for a rainy day. And so we also have what we call financial literacy capability training, where we talk about, we go through, there's a budget module, a credit module, trust, wills, estate planning, insurance. These are all the things that people need to know about before there's a crisis. And it's just about trying to get your house in order. So if and when there's some blip, in the future, you're better prepared to handle it. And as I said, with many of the folks, there are going to be people who are not going to be able to afford their mortgages. And so, I'm sure they're concerned about that now, but start thinking about what you would do. What could you do? And you may have to be creative. There may be things that you don't want to do. You may have no choice but to sell your house. And so don't do what we often see, folks stick their heads in the ground, and because they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. And they give us a call on Friday and say, my house is supposed to be sold at
the sheriff's out in the driveway kind of deal, right? Like, too late at that point, right? Yeah. So it's always interesting to me because, in a lot of ways, the way my mind operates is to bring pieces together, to find organizations that I think, to your point, like, I believe May it's Mental Health Month, Mental Health Awareness Month. Yeah. And I think there's a lot that, a lot of these things run together, financial challenges often can affect your mental health challenges, and probably in the opposite direction as well. So you mentioned Community Health Network, right?
Okay, yes.
Yeah. Now, can we talk a little bit about like other collaborative opportunities? I'm thinking of a handful of organizations in the city that on the mental health side that would be aware of maybe some people going through financial challenges. And has it been a lot of that reciprocity over the years for NHS, or do you see more opportunity for that?
Well, I see more opportunity for that. For instance, we had, we almost never turn down an opportunity to present, because you never, it's all part of getting the word out, and as I said, I don't think there's ever a time when we do a presentation, to the public where someone, comes and says, this is great information. We didn't know that you existed. And not everybody's going to, but, you make a presentation and there's a pastor of a church, in the audience. And he then comes up to you and says, I'd like for you to come, and present to my church. And so these are the folks that we need to get to, because, people hear about, all of the, deed theft and all the other scams out there. They, are more inclined to trust coming to an NHS or other agency if they hear it from their pastor, if they hear it from, a trusted family member, friend, or neighbor, from their elected official. They're going to be skeptical of, as they should be, of these, some of these resources, being sort of put out in front of them if they don't know where they come from. But yeah, and we are very much, open to that. So we do work with, some of the, the pastors in some of the larger churches.
Mm-hmm.
We can participate in what are called community, they're typically homeowner renter community resource fairs that HPD, which is Housing Preservation and Development, the city's housing agency, puts on. I just got a call the other day from a gentleman there, who always invites us to their events and who always attends our events. Every year in June, we do a big, what we call annual community, housing fair. And he said, he participated in the community resource fair we did on April 30th and said, this was great. We had folks there talking about employment, and that's a little different for us. I mean, it's not housing related, but it is related to the individual's financial health. We had someone there talking, talking about the stimulus, payments and things like that. So we've changed things up a little bit now. So instead of focusing entirely on housing, we're trying to bring whatever resources we think folks need, into the community. And because, as I said, we have such a large following, we can reach a lot of people who say, oh, I do want to hear about this.
So that event you're talking about that happened in April 30th, that was your event, or I think I missed it.
Yes,
That was your
that was
event. Okay. And again, it was more in a holistic view, as you mentioned earlier, of your financial wellness as a
right.
whole versus, hey, here's this thing called buying a house. It's, who you are as a financial individual. Yeah, I think that's, I think the more, organizations like yours and nonprofits in general are there to be of service and to bring these types of resources. Like, the government may come up with programs, but the government doesn't implement the programs. I mean, it's the folks on Main Street that are doing that. So I want to ask you from a, I work with a number of nonprofits, and I think an agency like yours is different. I'm guessing, but I'm going to ask you that from a funding perspective. Like I know a lot of organizations have had to, well, most organizations or businesses have had to either take things here to the internet, online, virtual, or cancel things outright. And what I'm leaning towards now is not necessarily programs, but from a fundraising perspective. Like, is NHS an organization that, do you have a development person? Are you set up that way, or is your funding government funded and, you don't have to raise funds?
No, our funding is government funded, primarily government funding, but we're also funded, by the banks.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it is specifically, program related, but other is just sort of general support. But we don't have a development person, and we need to have a development person, because one of the things we need to broaden, that base. For instance, right now, with most of our funding coming from the city and the state, that's a concern when you listen to Mayor de Blasio talk about how many billions of dollars, the city is in the hole.
And Cuomo's been saying the same too.
Exactly.
That we're in trouble. So if you're counting on those funds, that's a scary situation. So you want to diversify, right?
Right. Whether it's, corporate funding, either, direct, funding or through foundations that they have, but everybody's going to be going, to the same places. One of the things that we saw in our industry was that, years ago, we were all probably, NHS of Jamaica always had a lot of government funding, but we were very heavily dependent on bank funding. And then, it seems, every time you turned around, banks were combining. And so, you didn't keep the same level of funding. And so it was necessary. So what we started to see was while we were always primarily government funded, there was a lot more competition for those funds. As the bank funding dried up, more and more agencies, turned to the city, or the state for funding.
So when you talk about that development person, is that an active opportunity? I mean, is that like an open requisition for a job right now? Like that I could put out there to the world and talk to people about, or is it still something under consideration?
It's still something under, consideration. It's funny because it was yesterday, heaven only knows why, things come up when they do, but yesterday, when I got up, the first thought was, okay, what is NHS, or what does NHS of Jamaica need to look like on the other side of this? And, to work towards this. It's just like in preparing to, to work from home. I don't think anyone was thinking about it, but, in my for-profit, experience, I always worked in, sort of a service business, working for very demanding, either investment bankers or attorneys.
Sure.
And so, the expectation was that service was always going to be provided no matter what the challenge was. And so, when this started unfolding, I started doing the research, to find out. So when I'm standing at a bus stop that Friday and heard Governor Cuomo say as of 8 p.m. on March 22nd, I just got on the phone with an IT person and said, okay, turn it all on.
Mm-hmm.
So,
You were ready for that?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. If we could stop there for one sec, but I don't want to lose your point. But you had this contingency plan all kind of set up that in case, yeah.
So we were day one, Monday, March 23rd, we were working.
Yeah.
Everybody had remote access. Everybody, and I said, and of course it was, sort of a shock to all of us. But, what I have said, continually throughout this is, we always talked about, finding ways, to, be more efficient, to reach more people. And, I said, we kind of got dragged into this, without, a lot of planning, but there are definitely, positives to it. I mean, I think what the staff has seen is, I don't think anybody probably would have believed before that we could have continued, operating, without skipping a beat.
I know it for our own firm, for the Vanguard Insurance Agency, we haven't missed a beat. And I will tell you, the last in-person meeting I had was an open enrollment meeting on March 11th in Bayside, Queens. And then the world changed. And so March 12th, 13th, that was it. That Friday, the 13th is it, so we were a little ahead of the curve before Cuomo and everybody sort of said that's it, but we knew it was coming at that point. I feel like my wife, I got to give her a lot of credit. She bought enough food for us never to have to leave again, I think. And you and I were joking earlier, Amazon keeps delivering more stuff, so I think we could probably stay for another 6 months if we had to. But in seriousness, like business wise, I mean, we're fully productive. We're doing everything we would have been doing. And I think, and I wonder if it's something even you want to talk about, is like, now we're talking about opening things back up, whether it's right or wrong politically or healthcare wise. We don't need to really analyze all that. But I mean, if you're efficient doing things the way you are, and like I say, we're efficient doing it, it proves in our business, big companies. I heard Twitter said their people can work remotely forever. Mm-hmm. Google and Facebook, and I might be mixing up who it is, but both said their folks can work from home till at least the end of the year. So have you thought that part through, like from an efficiencies perspective?
Well, I have, as they, talk about opening up. I mean, I certainly have, my opinions, on that. And I think with us being in the Metro New York City area, clearly, as has borne out over this, we're a whole different animal, from the rest of the city. And, you think of something as, what on earth is social distancing if you have to use the subways? I said, so you leave home at 5 o'clock in the morning and you never get to work,
Come
right?
on, Lori, I'm with you. Like, what does that even mean? I mean, we're packed in like sardines into the trains. Like, there's no, how do you do that?
It's just not possible. And before everyone was mandated to shelter home. Staff had expressed some concerns, and so we started out by saying, okay, no more in-person counseling sessions. You'll do your counseling sessions over the phone. People can fax. But just to allow for some transition, we set up an area in the front of one of the offices. So if someone had to bring something in, because they couldn't email it or whatever, they could. But we were going to limit them to just being in that area. And then as the numbers started to mushroom, we said, okay, we're not even going to do that. We put signs up on the door that says, we're open, but we're not accepting visitors. Call, et cetera. You can mail things to us. And then, like I said, it was just within a couple of days that the whole world changed. But I said, what I said to the staff was, think of all the people we lose. For instance, as I said, our home. Our home buying workshops, are very heavily subscribed to. Like I said, you can pack people in. But you have the folks who work in Manhattan, and they can't, typically we'll do 10 a.m., 10 to 12, or 2 to 4, or 6 to 8. Now, I just remember, if you work downtown in the financial district, you're hard pressed to get out to Jamaica by 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Even if you walk out of the office at 5 o'clock, it's pretty much just not possible. And so I said, so this is an opportunity. I said, now, we can get those people who aren't going to get home until 7 o'clock. We can do a workshop, from 7:30 to 9:30, and you can do it from home. You don't have to worry about being in the office and locked in. So I said, there's benefits to this.
I think there's incredible benefits. And, it's funny. I know from my own life, like I put in a lot of hours, and, I'll say, just because we do things a certain way doesn't necessarily make them the right, correct way we should be doing things. But, it's routine. You get caught up. It's a cycle. Like, but now, I mean, business wise, I'm incredibly efficient. I've been home all this time, and I get to actually engage with the people that I was going to work to support anyway, who I never saw during the week. So it's like things have changed. I don't, I've sort of stopped saying when things go back to normal, because that ship has sailed. That world that was in mid-March, not to get like totally like, not to make it a big hyperbole, but it's just that world is not, we're not there anymore. Like what that was, we've evolved from that, and there's going to be a lot of change. And you that's an incredible example of how you're able to reach more people, be more efficient in doing so, by just putting it on Zoom. I'm assuming you Zoom or whatever you're using, GoToMeeting, or, I mean, I've been on Zoom meetings with like 2 people, like you and I, and then hundreds of people. And then, I'm sure I've been on somewhere I've gone and it's in a webinar format, and there's thousands of people involved. And it certainly exponentially changes the level of service that can be provided to the community and to the people that that need this education.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I've when we did we had done a town hall with our elected officials, and that was April 20th, and that was organized by David Weprin's office. And when I spoke to his chief of staff, I took the opportunity to say, I was telling him who on our side was going to be presenting, et cetera. But I said, at some future date, I'd like to, to talk. Like I said, we're talking about, reaching out to folks that we have not worked with, before. And I know everyone sort of focuses, for us, they focus on Southeast Queens. And yes, there's a tremendous amount of need, but there are people, in all economic strata data all across Queens. And there is no reason why, someone who lives in College Point, who doesn't know, and there are not that many of us in Queens that provide these types of services. So these folks don't get service at all, or what, they go to Manhattan, they don't have to. We're here. And so we need to get the word out. And I think by being able to use Zoom and, and other, means and forming relationships, with folks like at the Queens, Commerce, the word will get out there. Now we'll, so in addition, it's a good thing to be overwhelmed, but, I think that also will open up additional funding opportunities.
100%. If you're hitting and servicing more people, you're going to be able to ask for more dollars, I would imagine, right? Because it's going to be performance based, right?
Exactly.
And so I'll tell you, I mean, I wrote it down on one of these pages of notes, but I sit on the board of the Bayside Business Association, and my business partner, Ed Probst, is the president of the Bayside Business Association. Very funny story. We met through the Bayside Business Association about 17 years ago when we were both younger people. And I mean, I'm just going to say what I say because I commit to things, because then we make it happen. But I'm speaking on behalf of the BBA. I think it would make a lot of sense to do some sort of educational meeting together. And again, I don't know when the real life ones will happen, so we'll do one on Zoom. Yeah. So I'll make that connection to Ed, and because we're serving the business community, but we're also serving individual people. But like you said, if there's a pastor, and it's funny you mentioned a pastor, because I met a pastor at Queen's Day up in, I had to meet a gentleman who's a pastor in Bayside. I had to drive all the way up to Albany to meet him there. And I say had to because we were both there for the same Queen's Day, and we met. And then he became somebody who would kind of start attending meetings of the Bayside Business Association. So that to me is networking, and that's how all this stuff sort of happens. But, if you or somebody on the team was to present on behalf of or in conjunction with the BBA, there's going to be people in that room, physical or now virtual room, that are going to say, this is something I didn't even know we had in the borough here. And this is something that's like, if it's an attorney, this is something that's valuable to my community. So that's just, as I'm saying that, and we talked about this earlier, I'm thinking about the diversity across the borough. So do you have people on your team that speak multiple languages to serve different parts of the borough? Because as you know as well as I do, certain pockets of certain neighborhoods, they speak their own language, their native tongue, and may not speak English, or at least are more comfortable in speaking their native language.
Our staff, we can, counsel and work with folks, speaking English or Spanish. Okay. But last year we had applied, for some funding, through the city. It was a sort of a special, sort of pilot program called Ready to Rent. And it was, the goal was to educate people on the affordable housing lottery process, and the availability of, affordable apartments. And we applied thinking, of course, that, if we were selected, we would get Community Planning Board 12, which is where our office is. They gave us Community Planning Board 7, which is downtown Flushing. And the targeted population was Asian and Hispanic. And so we got busy. We got in touch with, we work with AFI. We refer folks to Asian Americans for Equality, AFI. We refer folks to them for home improvement loans. AFI, the city councilman, churches, one of the churches allowed us to use their space. And basically what we did was we took our presentation, the folks at AFI translated it for us. And so we projected in Mandarin. The counselor, Serenelli, the pre-purchase manager, she did the presentation, and then somebody translated into Mandarin. They wanted us to have, I think, just, they asked for, I believe it was 35, in one session. We were going to do 3 sessions and 50, so not a lot of people. And it just shows you what the need is. We walked into the room and there were almost 200 people there. For the following sessions, and the word spread like wildfire. through the Mandarin, through the Chinese community. The next sessions, we held one at HSBC in downtown Flushing.
Hmm.
We got a call from one of our board members, one of our board members who works for HSBC, who told us that the bank manager said folks were lined up for hours. I think the session started at 12. People were there from 9 o'clock waiting to get in because they had heard from, friends, neighbors, family about, this affordable, housing and how to apply for it. So, and we'll find a way, and if it, as I said, if it means that we have to partner with someone. And the wonderful thing about this was at the end of the presentation, there were reporters there, from the different, some of the different community newspapers. And there were people who came up to us and said, if people need to be counseled, I will translate. I'll volunteer to be a translator for you.
See, I get very touched by a lot of conversations I have with people in the nonprofit field, because you're making an incredible impact at the level that people need it, and you're changing the trajectory of someone's life. Honestly, there's no other way to say, like, that's what goes on. So 200 people show up. Did you say they expected 35, or they wanted you to be prepared for 35 and 200?
Yeah, we only needed to do, 35, and one of the sessions needed to have 50.
Mm-hmm.
And, my staff, and it's, it didn't, they didn't think we were going to get many people, because apparently we had gone, they had spent a couple of years ago, they had gone to the downtown Flushing area, and they said, they were trying to hand out flyers, letting people know about the service, and they just, weren't well received at all.
Mm-hmm.
People
it's difficult. Yeah, yeah.
And like I said, we did that first session. The church had to close the doors. I mean, people were like very,
awesome.
upset. But as I said, for the next session, because we handed out, information that says, well, these are when the next sessions are. They said hours. The session was starting at 12 o'clock, and folks were outside at 9 o'clock lined up. And what happened? We were only supposed to do one session that day. We ended up doing either 3 or 4. We just compressed them because there was no way we could turn folks away.
You couldn't leave, right? It was like you wanted to. That's what you're there.
Thanks to HSBC, because they thought they were doing the one session, and we just, we'd finish one and start another.
That's awesome. And so that's, and again, that's with the limitations of physical space. Now, how do you leverage this new world of this technology that we'll have to use by necessity, no choice anymore? You could have thousands of people plugging into these sessions. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the other things that we do, we do workshops and counseling on fair housing and tenants' rights. There recently been, some changes in the city. And in the past, we'd schedule a session, and we'd be lucky, people would commit. We'd get 17, 18, 20 people committing, and only 5 would show up. The first virtual, tenants' rights, fair housing workshop that we did, there were almost 30 people in attendance. And again, that's because folks didn't have to leave their home, or if they had their cell phone. So now I don't have to say, oh, I'd rather go here instead. And I've also said to the staff, it's unfortunately we have a captive audience. I said, so folks who before didn't have the time or didn't make the time, now they do have the time. And they're also facing situations that make it necessary for them to have as much information as possible.
It's more relevant than ever, right? The education that you're bringing out is more relevant than it ever could have been. And the barrier to entry, I don't have to leave my job or my office to get there. I literally turn off my email and I look at the screen. And it's exactly. Like, and I think you just said it too. It's like, I'm fortunate to have the computer, the whole thing, but some people, if they just had a phone, you can plug in on Zoom on your phone. It's like it's not a big deal. And it's a lot more manageable. So I'm excited to see more of the programming that you have coming out. And I want to, and we talked a little bit about this on a phone call a couple of weeks back about social media and helping amplify the message. So what I want to make sure you do is, as this goes, and if it's somebody on your team that you want me to coordinate with, that as things are rolling out, that like I'm going to share a picture of you and me like on LinkedIn and about this conversation we had, And I got to tell you, there'll be, 100 people, 150 people will make a comment, so that means they've looked at it and then they'll share it with other people. But, probably 1,100, 1,200, maybe 1,500 people will look at it because I could
Mhm.
tell how many people are checking out the stuff. And that's, to me, that's what this is all about. It's about helping amplify the message. So we could always talk, separate from this about social media and things like that. But if there's somebody on your team you want to connect me with directly, where I can, at least when I know some things are coming out, that I can help get the word out, I want to do that
Okay.
for the
Well,
organization. So how does somebody at this point, how do they find out about NHS of Jamaica? What's the best way for them to connect with the organization?
the best way. Um, I guess the easiest way, the easiest way, if someone has housing issues, they can call they can call 311, or they can call, it's the Center for New York City Neighborhoods, because we're part of their hotline.
Mhm.
We do a lot of foreclosure counseling. And so when folks call and they have an issue, because we partner with them, they will make referrals, to us. We have just signed on as a partner to do the counseling for a program that's called Home Fix. That's also through the Center for New York City Neighborhoods, because for our home improvement program, folks have to be, their income cannot exceed, 80% of median. And that means it leaves a lot of people out. This is state funding. It comes from the Affordable Housing Corporation. We can give grants of up to $40,000. It requires that a lien be put on the house, but we're talking about people who typically would not otherwise be able to repair their homes. There's the income cap. There are also asset caps, unfortunately. So we may have someone, who falls within the income, guidelines, but if they have a 401k, or a pension that they can borrow from, we can't, service them. So this Home Fix program is a good program because it's going to make funding available to people, who are what we refer to as over income. And so that's a good thing. And NHS Jamaica will be doing counseling for that. And there are other partners, HPD and AFI and Parodnik, who will be doing, the actual funding of the project or the construction management piece of it. But, we have a huge waiting list for our Affordable Housing Corporation Home Improvement Grant Program. Well over 200 people. Takes a couple of years to cycle through, but it's a great program. As I said, if you don't have the funding, and you happen to need $40,000 worth of work, and you qualify, to be able to get $40,000 worth of work done. And what's kind of unique about our program is that we don't just provide the funding, we also monitor the construction. We have a construction services manager, and he goes out and he does a top to bottom scope of the house, because you may say, well, I want to have my bathroom done. Well, he may determine that your electrical is a hazard, and so
Mhm.
we'll come back and say, okay, we've prioritized things. The kitchen has to wait. We need to replace the wiring in your house. We have a number of contractors. We try to focus on working with MWBE contractors whenever possible. Some of that is dictated by city and state requirements, of the organizations that they fund. And it's also important to do that because it supports, the folks in the community, who have made, that investment. So, we do a scope, we determine what work is going to be done. We solicit 3 bids from our contractors. They're submitted to the construction manager. Homeowner has a say in, who they would like to work with. NHS handles the payments, to the contractors. Contractors are not paid until the work is inspected, but that
And that's
construction,
NHS inspectors that go out to see.
it's an NHS staff, a construction manager. And, he's he was a licensed contractor. He also teaches our handyman certificate program.
I remember seeing that not at your office, but at one of your affiliate organizations in another part of the borough, that they had like a workshop set up
Mhm.
where they would have like teach you how to do certain things around the house. So we didn't even get to talk about that. Tell me about that.
Well, first of all, I have to say NHS of Jamaica was the first one with that program. And when it started in 1976, 2 years after the organization started. We used to call it Queens Home Maintenance at the time.
Okay.
And that program got started because we had done a home improvement loan for a homeowner, and this person didn't know that they couldn't put a hot, you couldn't put a hot pot, this is a simple thing, on a Formica counter.
Okay.
And so, out of that came, people don't know a lot about, how to repair things in their home, and certain things you can do. I mean, they're simple enough to do, but for those folks who didn't want to do the work, just getting some basic knowledge of what is the right way to do things meant that they could, provide some sort of oversight of contractors that they did have come into their homes.
Because they're an educated consumer. So
That's
they can,
right.
yeah. Because you know what I always hate to do, and this is why I lease cars now, is I hate to drop off a car at the mechanic and have no idea what they're gonna, let's just say,
Exactly.
suggest that I need.
Right.
Right? That was always the worst thing. So
Yeah.
if you know something, you're better off. Yeah. I didn't mean to
Absolutely.
cut you off, but that was what I was thinking about.
Yeah, and so that was, we used to, the classes used to meet, they always met at the well, for years we partnered with Allen AME Church. They
Sure.
provided a space, to us on Linden Boulevard, and we had the
Mhm.
classes there. But when we bought our building in downtown Jamaica in 1995, we moved the classes to the basement. So we have a full workshop, set up. I actually took one of the courses.
I've been to that building. We were up on, I think, the second floor. That's
Right.
the building. Is it on Farmers?
On 162nd.
Okay, yeah. Not no, but that building on 162nd in Jamaica.
That's where we do our, and actually, so over the years, like I said, we expanded. We used to just run, we'd teach everything, and you'd have like a 3-hour session. Now we've expanded it, and we have 11 courses. We've got, basic and advanced plumbing, electrical, tiling, flooring, locksmith, all
Really?
that. Yeah, and then and this because we would do the courses, and the students kept saying we need more, we don't know enough. So that's why we added the advanced classes. And then a couple of years ago, we partnered with York College, so that when they complete the courses, they get a certificate, from the continuing ed
No
department.
kidding.
And then was it 2 years ago? I think a lot of the folks in the class, went through the whole series, and some of them were already, handymen,
Hmm.
but they wanted to become licensed. So we added a licensing course, and
So
we
then,
had,
so they were doing this to do some stuff around the house, but then they find a little vocation out of some of this
right,
too, right? That's really cool. That's great.
right.
My wife is incredibly handy. Right now she's actually building a patio, like literally, like she has patio stones and breaking stuff here, patio stones and sand and I should probably take some of those classes over at
I
NHS
was going to say, you're in the
and
house.
yeah, and then surprise her that I actually know how to do some stuff because I don't know how to do most of those
Oh yeah,
things.
we do masonry too.
Really? And is that so? These are the individuals, they pay for these courses as well? Is it like a
Yes, they
nominal
do.
fee?
They register through York, but we actually do the training. The training is delivered, as I said, by the construction manager is the person who does the handyman training, and it's called, it's the handyman certificate program now. And a couple of years ago, after Superstorm Sandy, we had gotten funding from the state, and we opened up an office out in Far Rockaway, and we actually had we were doing employment job readiness training, and we added then a youth component. So we
Hmm.
had a youth handyman training program, and they would come 4 days a week, for 3-4 hours a day, and some of them actually got jobs with some of the contractors who were working out in the Rockaways after the storm.
Yeah.
So
There's so much need for
yeah.
for that type of stuff. It's funny. Like I remember I didn't pay much attention. My father did a lot of work around the house when I was growing up, and I was really never interested. And I'll tell one little cute story. My father always said that no one would ever steal the TV from our home because I was always watching it. So, so my point is, anytime like there's things around the house that I probably could have learned, in the first, like, let's say 20, 22 years of my life, I wasn't paying attention to them. I was busy watching TV apparently. But my wife wasn't. She's really handy with this stuff. But I'm trying to do stuff. I'm trying to learn more projects. I used to be all about outsourcing. I used to say, I'll go do what I do really well, and I'll hire somebody to come in and do what they do. So it just gets done once. Although I paid for it, but it got done once. But as I get older, I'm trying to learn more.
Mhm.
And I certainly could be a little more handy. So I'm gonna have to check out some of those courses myself. Anything else that first of all, this was an incredible conversation. I learned so much about your organization that people need to be aware of. Is there anything else you want to kind of put a bow on for people that would be checking in and listening?
You know, as I said, I just, as we said before, we are the best kept secret. And so, there's a lot that we can do for people. But, the other thing is that, we do make referrals. And so, if you don't know where to go, you can just give us a call. It doesn't have to be housing related. But, one of the things we do, all the time is we ask people share the information, anything that has to do with housing. You say, well, I'm not sure, but give, NHS of Jamaica a call, and no, they don't just service Jamaica.
Mhm.
You can come from anywhere. We have folks that come from Long Island.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah, because I thought we talked about that before. Because a lot of the other nonprofits that I do some work with are Nassau or even Suffolk County based, and there might be some nice collaboration, and you can work with those organizations as well. You're saying that that's important. So how do they find you? Is it NHS?
It's, our website is,
Mhm.
www.nhsj.org.
Okay.
And you can call us. Our phone number is 718-291-7400. Just leave a voicemail and somebody will get back to you. Talk to you again. We're just, we're easy to find. And if there are, if someone, let's say, lives in Long Island and, they're calling on behalf of or want to refer someone else, I'd say, go to, Long Island Housing Partnership, go to one of them and say, is there someone in Queens? Is there an organization in Queens that, can help me, or Brooklyn? And, we all make referrals, to each other, because we know that it's easier, sometimes for folks to deal with agencies in their neighborhood. But, the other thing, just to kind of go back to the pre-purchase, piece of it, we talked about how challenging it is to buy a home, but, there are so many programs out there that folks don't know about. Like, many people, are not even aware, if you fall, within that income band, that banks are targeting, banks themselves have down payment and closing cost assistance, programs. There are purchase rehab programs out there. Sony May has, has a program where they are okay with the house being underwater. So let's say the house costs $500,000. You've got your down payment. If you may qualify for a grant, there's some programs where you can layer as much as $80,000 of grant funds to buy and rehab the house. And Sony May is okay with, they're okay with this program with your house being underwater. So you may put in 530 all in, but if it gets somebody of modest means, into a home, they're fine with the fact that the house is technically only worth $500,000. And
Really?
so that's the value of working with an NHS or a similar agency, because we have access to and know about these programs. Other thing is, many people are interested in selling their home. There are people who think they can't sell their home because I need work, I need to do my roof. No, you don't need to do your roof, because there are programs out there that will lend the buyer the money to
Right.
buy and fix the house.
Yeah, your 203K type opportunities, right, where they can do the work on their, they can
Right.
purchase
Well,
and then,
VA, some of
yeah,
the banks themselves have their own purchase rehab programs,
yeah.
government programs.
See, that's what it is, man. That's why this is an incredible asset, your organization, and you're serving, yeah, I would imagine over all these years, thousands of people, thousands and
Over
thousands of,
50,000,
how many?
over 50,000 have been served
Oh my
overall.
God. That's incredible. That's 50,000 families that have been changed and affected by that. That's awesome. Lori, I appreciate you being my friend. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you.
Um, you're welcome. I will share all types of information when we post this, with information about the organization and how you can find out more about Neighborhood Housing Services of Jamaica. And I'm still here in the attic. I'm your buddy Tommy D, Philanthropy and Focus. I always get a good laugh out of my guests when I talk about the attic, and it makes me laugh too. So we will see you all again soon. Thanks so much. Take care. Thanks again, Lori.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
All right, bye-bye.